Today's podcast is a part of a series about the members of a network that I am a part of called Women Execs on Boards. All of the women in this series have completed programs through the Harvard Business School to prepare them for corporate governance. I wanted to tell their stories because I'm so inspired by the women who are in this network. They are high-level, high-profile women, but when you look behind the scenes, you see that they have worked very hard to get to where they are. They've been through so many different trials, traumas, and they've just kept getting back up and climbing and working hard to get to the top. And the really amazing thing is that they're leaving the ladder down and reaching back down in the organizations to pull up other women and men into leadership positions. And so I can't wait for you to hear their story. I hope you enjoy this podcast series. Hello, welcome to Real Life, Real Leaders. Today our guest is Nicole Parent Haughey. She's the Chief Operations Officer for Island Creek Oysters. She's also a member of the Board of Directors for Ultra Industrial Motion and also for Allegiant. And she's a fellow network member with me and Women Execs on Boards. Welcome to the program, Nicole.
Hi, Bonnie. Great to be here.
Well, I am excited to hear your story. You have obviously made it to some pretty significant places in your career. And, you know, you're young, you've got a lot left to go. So I can't wait to see what all you end up doing with your career. But
you're
tell
sweet.
us a little.
Young is a relative term.
Well, you seem young. Yeah, that's true. It is. So let's start with just where are you from and how did you get into your career choice?
Sure. So I grew up in Abington, Massachusetts, a small town, probably 30 minutes outside of Boston. Went to public school, went to Harvard, was a soccer player at Harvard, and then transitioned to Wall Street, where I worked for probably 20-something years as an equity research analyst and started an independent equity research shop. And then I think just based on being an analyst analyzing a sector, sometimes we don't think about the industry in which we operate. And so at the time that I decided to start the independent equity research company was in the financial services downturn, 08, 09. And it was largely because the fundamentals of the business were just not great. And it was a great opportunity. And people always say, if you can make it in a recession, your business model is pretty sound. And I think that proved to be the case. And I slowly have sort of intentionally pivoted more to operational roles, having had a lot of financial analysis experience and background and transitioning more to the strategy and operations, which is what I'm doing now for Island Creek.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So I want to back up. I actually didn't know you played soccer at Harvard. Maybe you've said that and I didn't know, I didn't hear it, but talk about that for a minute, because that you have to be able to translate some of that experience to the leadership.
Absolutely. I mean, I think playing on a team teaches you first and foremost, which is why I think on Wall Street, you actually see a lot of athletes perform successfully, because you have to learn from your failures and you have to be resilient and you have to be able to take feedback. So I think the whole idea of being a competitive Division I athlete where you're constantly out there, working with your teammates, but trying to also win, and just when you have hard times, you get feedback, you learn how to be better. And I think you also learn how to collaborate and work well with others. So I think I have historically had a pretty good track record of hiring athletes, because I think a lot of the skills that you learn throughout your life, not just in college, really position you well to succeed in life going forward.
I agree with that. In fact, we have a thing in Kansas City called Win KC. And it's really all about that. It's about getting women into sports and young girls into sports, because it does give you so much, all of that stuff that you just said, the grit, the team, the get back up, the taking the feedback and getting better. So all of those are so important in leadership.
Absolutely.
And so now you're like in a chief operations role and on these board roles. Just talk a little bit about what does the day-to-day look like in a chief operations role in the company that you're in today?
Sure. So I'm only about a month and a half in. A lot of it is drinking from a fire hose. I would say I've always been a morning person. I get more done between 7 and 9 a.m. than I do probably for the rest of the day. And that's always been the case. So I get in pretty early and spend a lot of time just I would say managing my calendar to make sure. And I just had this conversation with some of my team, and how do you create time to think strategically? And the biggest piece of advice I could give them was, when a meeting gets taken off your calendar, steal that time for yourself to actually step back and be practical about how you incorporate strategic thinking into every part of your day. So we spend a lot of time, we do investigate KPIs, our key performance indicators for the business. That's my first meeting on Monday mornings. And I would say we go from there, and we have a lot of, right now is our busy time for the holidays for our e-commerce business. So we're spending a lot of time managing our procurement, our operations team, and then also just managing the inventory as we think through, what do we have to do for both of the businesses that we have. So a lot of it has been spent meeting with people and getting to know my team and understanding sort of the puts and takes. And I think, COVID has certainly created a lot of economic headwinds for a lot of businesses. And so what we've also learned is how to be resilient and figure out how to pivot when you have to pivot. And so for us, we really have a phenomenal e-commerce business that had been very small prior to the pandemic. And I think what we learned is we had the infrastructure in place, and that business has just flourished. And it's just, it is exciting. And I think it just shows when you invest wisely in your businesses, you're in a great position to be able to, capitalize and play offense as opposed to defense in a difficult time.
Well, I love the companies that have been able to pivot quickly. It's and I think that a lot of them, like yours, you probably surprised yourself. Like we didn't realize we were as ready as we were. It's just like I worked with one company here in Kansas City that was a tech company, and they had about 100 employees, and they were able to go and be completely 100% remote over the weekend. And, it's like, wow, we didn't know we could do that.
Yep.
So, and they're a really very high security firm. So like to be able to do high quality in a short period of time, and sounds like that's what you guys are able to do. But talk about the company for a minute, because when I was looking at the company on the website, I thought, wow, that seems like a really great culture. So tell us about the company.
So it was started in the mid 90s by Skip Bennett in Duxbury, Massachusetts. And
wait, it's an oyster company.
It is. It's Island Creek Oysters. So we started, the hallmark of the company was actually, if you can believe it, in clams. He tried harvesting clams unsuccessfully. And so I would say we have a farm where we, farm our own oysters. We have a hatchery where we grow seed for our own oysters. We have a distribution company that actually sells direct to chef. And then we also have an e-commerce business that sells direct to consumer. And then we also have a variety of restaurants and retail shops, Portland, Maine, Duxbury, Massachusetts, and then a couple of restaurants in throughout the greater Boston area.
And it looks like you do a lot of give back. Like that's what I was talking about. Like the culture seems, they talked about having fun and giving back. And so what is the story there?
I think when you look at the heritage of the company, Skip, the founder, and Chris, the president, have done an incredible job hiring terrific people that are committed to the company, but also committed to the mission of the company. And I think it's a broad sort of coastal community-based effort where we're supporting oyster farmers. And we have our own farm, but we also sell oysters from other growers throughout New England. And so I think these are people that are, surviving on an aquacultural based product and going out and harvesting it, every day and nurturing it. And so I think from a giving back and having fun perspective, it's a special place with a culture that it's hard to describe. I mean, everybody loves being there, and everybody is laughing and having a good time, but really passionate. I mean, when I think about what is it that Island Creek, offers our customer base, we have tremendous domain expertise about what we're selling and what we're farming and what we're harvesting. And I think that expertise on the product actually goes a long way to sort of instilling in all of our customers, both chefs and our consumers, how terrific the product is, and talk about the history of the product and how it's made, and really understand, and I think, educate our customers on how to shuck oysters and things like that. I mean, we've definitely, when I think about holiday packages that I've sent out, I've sent a lot of people to our videos on how to shuck an oyster, which, I think
I would do that too. Although I don't know that I would eat them, but
I'm still working on my ability to do it.
well, that sounds really cool. To get to a position like yours and to be on boards, there's no way you can get there without going through some things. And, the program and the book that we have coming out is all about, some of that behind the scenes leadership challenges. And so, are there one or two challenges that you've been through that have been particularly hard that, and how did you get through them?
There are. I mean, I would say for me, and I've done a lot of self-reflection over the course of my career. I think I've had the benefit of having a coach since I was probably 29 or 30 years old. And initially I was reluctant. And I think what I've found to do is just embrace it, because anybody who's going to help you fit into an organization and operate, at a really great level, you'd be crazy not to take feedback. So for me, the first coach that I ever had was forced upon me in a new organization. And I think I've had a coach ever since then. Just
to talk about that for a second, I'm a little surprised you were hesitant because you were an athlete. Because when I go in, like I do C-suite coaching, usually with CEOs, and that's the framework I usually give them. Yep. Is that, just think of yourself as the professional athlete. You need someone like looking at your swing or your golf swing, saying, no, you're dropping your shoulder, right? So
maybe it's how you presented it versus how my boss at the time did, which was, you don't really fit in so well into this organization. So we're going to try and help you fit into this organization better. So you sort of go into it saying, are you trying to get ammunition to fire me or not? I would say for me, the two examples, and they're very similar, is just Betrayal by two mentors in two successive roles that I had. And, being able to sort of look at myself, recover from both of them, in successive jobs, and quite frankly, reflecting on what are the red flags that I missed in those situations, and how do I trust my gut again? Because generally speaking, I'd like to think my gut hasn't steered me too wrong in my life. But in those two cases, I missed some things that in the end created really painful situations.
Can you talk about when you say betrayal, like what happened? Can you give us a little bit?
I can. And I'd say, I'm probably going to be more vague than you'd like, only because of confidentiality restrictions that I may have. But I'll give you as much as I can. Okay. I co-founded a company with a brilliant guy that I had worked with early on in my career. I think reflecting back, I thought at the time that we decided to start the company, our visions were aligned. I think I learned over time that they weren't. I really wanted to build a global powerhouse of a company, and looking at sort of what he wanted, I think it was much more a family owned and run business. And I think for me, in hindsight, the red flag that I missed was when we were creating our operating agreement for the business, he was unwilling to incorporate a no nepotism clause into that agreement. And at the time, it was sort of joked about, I have small kids, ha, ha, ha. And I think in retrospect, I should have thought a little bit harder about that, because we ended up bringing in several family members over time that probably wouldn't have been my first choice in terms of, qualifications, skill set, and what the company needed. I think the final nail in the coffin for that relationship occurred after I became engaged. I didn't get married until I was 41 years old. So I always say, and I say this when I speak to young ladies, I had a great life, but my professional career took off because it was at the expense of having a family. I didn't have one. I wasn't married. I didn't have a lot of other responsibilities that a lot of other women would have at that point in time. I finally got engaged, and he pulled me into his office, and this is my business partner, and said, I want to ask, are you still committed to this business? And my response, I was obviously appalled. And my response was, did you ask that question to the 3 or 4 guys who have gotten engaged who work for us while they've worked for us?
Right.
And, I pointed out that was a really inappropriate question for a lot of reasons. And that one day he'd realized that because he did have 2 small daughters. And so the other lesson I would say I learned from that experience is be wary of the silent partners. And sometimes silent partners who might be spouses that, don't actually have a stake in the business have a lot more to do with sort of strategic decisions that are being made for the company.
Absolutely. Yes. There are several family businesses in my own family. And, that was one of the things. Now I'm divorced now, but my ex-husband and I were we set that up early on to say, we will not be we put it in the documents that we were not involved in each other's business, because we had experienced it just gets so messy. And so you do have to be careful with the family stuff.
For sure.
So, yeah, interesting.
Today's podcast is brought to you by EDA and Women Execs on Boards Network. EDA, formerly known as Executive Development Associates, provides leadership development for the top 5% of your organization with custom executive programs, C-suite coaching, succession planning, and more. For more information, please visit www.executivedevelopment.com. And Women Execs on Boards is a network of high-level and often high-profile women who have all completed governance education at Harvard Business School and who are working together to collectively advance the state of women on boards and in senior executive positions. We have a new inspirational leadership book about courage, adaptability, resiliency, sense-making, and vulnerability, all shared through the stories and the struggles of 36 of our women leaders. The book is called The Courage to Advance and will be available in North America on September 14th and in the rest of the world in December of 2021. You can pre-order an individual copy at Amazon.com, or for multiple books for your book clubs or other groups, please go to www.thecouragetoadvance.com.
Tell me about the other one. So was the other one, you said it was similar, but
yeah, it was similar in that being betrayed by somebody you trust is a really hard thing. And so I would say, and it's difficult because fundamentally when you feel betrayed, right, you're hurt because somebody that you trusted did something to create that feeling. I was a senior executive at a Fortune 50 company, one of 2 women that senior at the company. I had cut my teeth, as I said, on Wall Street. So for me, Wall Street was very much a meritocracy. You performed, you got promoted, you moved higher, you managed more people. It was very simple. And I would say there wasn't a huge amount of politics. And so in hindsight, when I joined this company, I think I completely underestimated the power of politics in a large organization. And maybe it was naivete in that I hadn't experienced it. But I was at a company, working with senior executives and had several who were just undercutting me every step of the way, questioning my industry experience. I mean, I can point to one individual. I ran a strategy session for the senior executives of the team. And I always, as part of continuous improvement, you want to get better. I always do feedback after I host a large event like that, just to be able to say, what would you have done differently? How could we have done it better? And his feedback was, he gave me, I think it was a 1, and said, you have no idea what you're talking about. This was a huge waste of time. And, the hard part about that is you can tell it's ridiculous, because I had been in the industry for 15 years and had earned the right to have a seat at the table. But I think in that instance, I shared that feedback with my entire team, and people thought I was crazy and said, how could you, why would you do that? And I think a big part of it was because I knew that I knew what I was talking about. And the fact that a senior executive at the company felt bold enough to be able to do something like that and have no accountability, which, it's shocking in many ways.
Right.
But I would say, it showed the team 2 things. 1, like getting feedback is good. 2, not all feedback. You can take different pieces of feedback and throw it out, or you can take different pieces of feedback and internalize it and process it. And I would say number 3, how do you choose to handle a situation like that? And that would bring me to my second point. I have had very few supportive female senior mentors in my career. Part of it, Wall Street, there weren't very many women.
Right.
But I would say, and I think that's probably why I'm so supportive of young women moving up over time, and have spent a lot of time devoted to this, because I didn't get a lot of great mentoring from women. Instead, I got a lot of undercutting and behind the scenes, being threatened. And I think that's also a really hard thing. And so to fast forward to what actually happened over time, I ultimately resigned because somebody on my team told me that I was being replaced in my job. Now, keep in mind, I had phenomenal reviews. Everybody had, been supportive. I guess it was a well-known secret in the organization I was being replaced, and I didn't know it. Shortly after that, and I credit, that was a very hard thing for somebody junior to me
Right.
to come to say that they had heard. And I think, again, when you have good relationships with people, that's the type of information that you want to get from somebody. Soon thereafter, so when that happened, I resigned and just said, I can't lead a team when people are in the organization think I'm a lame duck, and, I just can't believe this is happening and that nobody actually told me this. And they offered me a different position, and one that I wasn't interested in. Fast forward to probably, a month later, we had a coup occurred, and there was an unexpected change in leadership. And the new CEO asked me to stay on and report directly to him and help him with the transition. And I agreed to do that. And I can point to, one woman in particular who hadn't been told that change had made, so hadn't been informed that I was actually staying, and was doing an exit interview with me, unbeknownst to me, and seemed very taken aback that I had chosen to stay, and was even more upset that nobody had told her. And I think for me, fast forward 2 months after helping this individual transition into his new role, I was told by somebody else that my role at the company was changing, and at least 2, and I think it ended up being 3 men were going to take on the role that I was doing by myself. And at that point, I just, I think for a lot of reasons, you reflect on things like this and you step back and just say, my core values are clearly not aligned. I mean, fool me once, shame on me. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me.
Right.
And so I just sort of called my husband and said, I'm out and I'm resigning. And I would say, left a ton of money on the table as a result of that decision. But for me, it was the right thing to do. And you reflect on it and say, should you have gone through litigation? And I still think, I still reflect back on it and think about no, because I think the mental anguish, having had that happen to me, two different times where you just reflect on how could somebody that you've worked with so closely do this to you? And business is business. And that's just the harsh reality of life. But I think it's a hard thing to do. And I feel fortunate that I had the flexibility to be able to do it. But I think the mental anguish of going through it once is enough, and going through it twice is just, life is too short and you move on from it.
Right. So first of all, it sounds like the culture was messed up there, because, it wasn't just you getting blindsided. It sounded like multiple people were blindsided.
I think that's accurate. And I think, in talking about Island Creek at the beginning, cultural fit is a really, really important thing for me. And it's taken, these types of experiences to realize it. And I think in the first experience that I alluded to, it was my own company. So in theory, you should be able to craft the culture exactly like you want it. And I think in practice, that just didn't happen. And so what I've realized since then, in sort of reflecting, and one of the ways that I've gotten through, these two experiences and come out stronger on the other side is, spending a lot of time with an executive coach working through what my next strategic vision is for 5 years. And that means looking at the red flags. That means looking at, my role in this, and how did I, maybe unwillingly or too easily trust others, and probably shouldn't have. How did I avoid things or seeing things that I probably should have seen sooner? And, obviously it takes two to tango. And I think in this case, I'm sure 50% of this sits on me, but it's how do you process all that and make sure that you don't make the same mistake as you move forward in your career. And therefore, as we talked about Island Creek's very special culture to me sort of trumps everything. Yes. And, it's a really important driver in happiness. It's in job satisfaction and sort of motivation and what makes you move forward.
Absolutely. Yes. I'm very big. I did the book Leading with Vision. And one of the things we found out in the research is, one of the number one things that companies need to have is a compelling vision that engages people around it. And it has to do with culture, connectivity, clarity, and courage. And so you got it. Culture is the first thing. And you have to get that right. And so when you don't have it right, it really causes all kinds of problems. But I will say something about the first thing, where you're talking about your partnership. More partnerships fail than make it. And so one of the reasons you're talking about, you thought you had the same vision. Well, I started out, I spent my first 3 years of my career as a high school English teacher.
My gosh, really? I didn't know that about you.
So before I went into corporate, but so I love words, I'm always I like to break them down and think about them. And so, but the word division, the word die means two. So two visions, division. So when you have two partners and they have separate visions, it's division, and that's what it causes. Or you get into a corporation and you have a CEO that's trying to go this way and a COO that's trying to go that way, or a CFO going, trying to go another way. It just doesn't work. And so, don't beat yourself up about that one.
No,
it happens.
It's not. It happens a lot. But I think it's like, again, just in retrospect, reflecting back and saying, okay, what did I miss? And that operating agreement thing seemed so insignificant at the time, but in reality, it wasn't.
This is your prenup.
That's right.
This is the prenup. So get it right.
That's right.
Okay, so looking back, first of all, what would you tell yourself? It was going, if knowing what you know now and just reflecting, what do you wish you had known?
I think they always say, and parents say this to kids, right? Like, I could tell you what to do, but I'm going to let you experience it yourself, because I could tell you until I'm blue in the face, but you're never really going to understand until you make the same mistake. I think the same thing is true. And so part of it is just being kind to yourself. And not, as you said, like, not beating yourself up,
Right.
and just looking at the big picture. I would say to anybody, I mean, my reflection on this has been the role of an executive coach in my life has been a constant since I was 29 years old. And it has served me well over time in navigating organizations and in reflecting on my own blind spots. I mean, I always say that we all, even the most accomplished executives and leaders, have blind spots. And typically those blind spots come out over and over and over again. And sometimes, people don't have coaching and don't see it, or don't really get feedback and miss it. So for me, the benefit of a coach has just been instrumental in being able to say, okay, and especially as I've pivoted in my roles, right? So from finance to operations has been a pivot, and running businesses is very different than sort of reporting on the financials of them. But being able to sort of incorporate all the things that matter to me. We talked about culture. We talked about people. People, and I probably didn't appreciate the human resources function until I owned it at my last job. We had a big HR organization, but for anybody running a company, your people are your number one asset. And if you do not invest in them, they will leave. They will go somewhere else that does. Right. And so I think having the benefit of being able to say, and, put your money where your mouth is, and invest in your people and invest in their development is a really important thing. And I would say, 360s are helpful for a lot of reasons, especially, I've had a lot of different organizations. I've been involved in a lot of different organizations in my career, and being able to get feedback is a really great thing to be able to help you be more effective in an organization. And feedback is difficult, and both good and bad. And because I was an athlete, I probably tend to focus more on the negative feedback, where I need to continuously improve, and don't celebrate the successes as much. But I would say, perception is perception on you, and it takes years to change perception. And sometimes people don't recognize that. And sometimes people don't also recognize or reflect on the perceptions that they create themselves. And so I think all of those things are a long-winded way of saying, invest in yourself, be true to yourself, make sure that you are surrounding yourself also with supportive people. I can remember telling my dad that I was leaving my high-paying executive job in the middle of a financial downturn, and my dad had worked in a company for his entire life and just could not process that I would just say, you know what, I'm ready for a change. This isn't making me happy anymore. And I sort of said to him, I don't need you to agree with this decision. I need you to support me. And I think that making sure you are surrounding yourself with really supportive people is also an important thing. And there are going to be people. I can remember when I left my own partnership, I had a friend who said, you are completely crazy. You're letting, your temper get the best of you. And I said, it's not temper. It's a fundamental difference in strategic thinking, and also just how, how you want to operate and have a company that you started. And so I think those are probably my highlights. There's a lot of them there, but I think
there's a lot in there, and that's good. No, it's good, because what you're really talking about is you're creating space for support, but also deep reflection. And there's a piece that I think we've missed in our fast-moving society is a time to just stop and think about what's really happening, and dive down a little deeper. Sometimes we need to do things differently. Sometimes we need to do companies differently, and we need more time for deep reflection. So, I think that's all really good. You said one more thing I was going to comment on, I thought was so good. I think it was just, oh, I know what it was. You were talking about people sort of judging you. And, my advice for anyone listening just would be to think of them as armchair quarterback, right? Like, it's easy to have an opinion about something when you're looking at it from the sidelines. And it's a whole different thing to be inside of it. So as a business owner myself, I have the Theodore Roosevelt's Man in the Arena poem. And I reflect on that one often, which is basically, it's the person in the arena who's got the blood and the dirt. And, those are the ones who are fighting the fight, not the critic.
Nope, that's right. And I mean, as a manager, I try and turn that on its head, and sort of when somebody questions a decision that, senior executives are making or that I'm making and they disagree with it, I always want to hear, right? I want to hear the other side. Mm-hmm. And as a manager, to me, I always want to bring in people that have different ways of thinking and approaching challenges, because groupthink can be a really bad thing. But that being said, it's not, okay, well, you don't like that. How would you fix it? What would you do differently? And when you sort of
helpful, not just critique.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, that's good. Well, thank you. This has been a great program. I've really enjoyed just hearing about your career, and thank you for sharing about your struggles. I know it's going to help others.
Thanks, Bonnie, and thank you for doing this. I think it's going to be a terrific book and podcast, and I'm really excited to see the final product.
A special thank you to our listeners for taking time to tune in to this week's Real Life, Real Leaders podcast. We hope today's story inspired you. Check out previous episodes on the podcast to hear from more industry leaders, and check back next week as we speak to another leader and hear his or her great stories of triumphs and messy struggles. If you enjoyed the podcast, please rate, subscribe, and share. I'm Bonnie Hageman, and I look forward to sharing more with you next week.